Welcome to part 3 of my discussion of A Nation at Risk. I'm Dr. Deborah Owens, and in this video, I'll share with you the findings and recommendations contained in the National Commission on Excellence in Education's final and highly controversial report. In the decades following the publication of A Nation at Risk, we've learned more about its creation and the choices the Commission made in using warlike rhetoric in order to create a report that would upend the education system in the United States. After all, these decisions would have far-reaching implications. Commission members would give interviews and discuss these decisions, maybe even revealing more than they intended. And you might be surprised at some of the commission members' initial response to President Reagan's speech unveiling A Nation at Risk to the American public. Had he even read the report? In spite of the hyperbolic and alarmist language of their final report, A Nation at Risk, the 18-month investigation of the National Commission on Excellence in Education yielded findings and recommendations that were actually less than sensational. Their findings included the following. High school curricula had become so diluted that they no longer had a central purpose. The report stated students were offered a curricular smorgasbord, including appetizers and desserts that could easily be mistaken for main courses. Academic expectations for American students were lower than ever before. Grades were inflated. High school students took far fewer higher-level math and science courses or foreign languages than their counterparts in other countries. American students spend a great deal less time in school than students in other industrialized nations. Instruction and study skills was of poor quality, and therefore students entered college without disciplined and systematic study habits. Too many teachers entered the profession from the bottom quartile of high school and college students. Teacher preparation programs spent too much time on methods courses, and not enough time is devoted to subject matter courses. There's a critical shortage of high-quality teachers in some fields, such as mathematics, science, foreign languages, and in fields such as education for the gifted and talented, special education, and teachers of English language learners. Based on their findings, the Commission outlined a set of recommendations that they believed held the promise for lasting reform. First, education in the new basics should form the foundation of the high school curriculum. The Commission offered recommendations for strengthening English, mathematics, science, social studies, and computer science courses. Second, grades should adequately reflect the performance level of students, and colleges and universities should raise admission requirements. Standardized tests of achievement should be administered at major transition points from one level of schooling to another, and particularly from high school to college or work. Textbooks and other school materials should be upgraded to ensure more rigorous content. Third, more homework should be assigned. Effective study and work skills should be taught, beginning in the early grades. Longer school days and a longer school year should be considered, and the school day should be better organized in order to expand the time available for learning. Schools should address discipline problems by disruptive students by considering alternative classrooms, programs, and schools. Absenteeism and tardiness should be reduced through the implementation of attendance policies with clear incentives and sanctions. With regard to teachers, the Commission recommended that standards be raised for students enrolled in teacher education programs. Students should be required to demonstrate their aptitude for teaching and their competence in an academic discipline. Colleges and universities with teacher education programs should be judged on how well their graduates meet these criteria. Salaries for teachers should be raised, But teacher salaries should be tied to an effective evaluation system that includes peer review. Superior teachers should be rewarded, average teachers encouraged, and poor teachers improved or terminated. A system of career ladders for teachers should be implemented to distinguish between new teachers, experienced teachers, and master teachers. Fifth, the Commission recommended that principals and superintendents garner support from the school and community for school reforms recommended by the Commission. School boards should assist with these efforts by providing administrators with professional development and other support. Finally, the NCEE noted the federal government should fulfill its role to ensure that the constitutional and civil rights of students and personnel are protected, collect data and statistical information related to education, support curriculum improvement and research, support teacher preparation in critical shortage areas, and provide financial assistance and research and graduate training. They stated the federal government has the primary responsibility to identify the national interest in education. To summarize, American high school students needed to get back to the basics, spend more time in school, do more homework, have higher expectations, take standardized tests, and read harder textbooks. We needed smarter and better teachers who made more money and were better prepared through more rigorous college and university teacher preparation programs. School administrators, school boards, and federal, state, and local governments needed to make sure that the Commission's recommendations for education reform are implemented. And the federal government should continue to fulfill its responsibility, which of course would depend on the continued existence of the Federal Department of Education. If the Commission's intention in revising their original 225-page initial report to a fiery 36-page report was to create alarm, then they were certainly validated by the reaction of the press and the public. The initial paragraph would ensure that. It begins with the following statement: Our nation is at risk. Our once unchallenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. This report is concerned with only one of the many causes and dimensions of the problem, but it is the one that undergirds American prosperity, security, and civility. We report to the American people that while we can take justifiable pride in what our schools and colleges have historically accomplished and contributed to the United States and the well-being of its people, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. What was unimaginable a generation ago has begun to occur. Others are matching and surpassing our educational attainments. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves. We have even squandered the gains in student achievement made in the wake of the Sputnik challenge. Moreover, we have dismantled essential support services, which helped make those gains possible. We have, in effect, been committing an act of unthinking, unilateral educational disarmament. While there was uniform agreement amongst commission members about the approach in reformulating the report, one commissioner conceded a decade later, in 1993, that the commission went through a period of contentious argument before agreeing on the dramatic language in the opening paragraph. In the end, however, the commission would agree to the inflammatory language of the report, citing the need for a clarion call to the public about the alarming state of education. Other commissioners would defend the hyperbolic language in the decades to follow. One commissioner explained that they were trying to electrify the nation. He went on to say, "We used terms that were as negative as we could think of, so we used war." In 2009, 26 years after the publication of A Nation at Risk, Jay Summer, the lone teacher on the commission and National Teacher of the Year in 1981-82, also defended the use of the alarmist tone in the report. He further asserted, however, that for the commission, the choice to use hyperbole was more important than the facts. According to Summer, in order to be more effective, some alarming language had to be used. That was immediately there. It was understood that we have to say things in an alarming kind of way, even to the point where the statistics may not have been quite correct. Jay Summer would go on to say, and I'm quoting from a 2009 interview, "We were talking about inner city schools, and we totally we left out the successes, and that was deliberate. I mean, there is no comparison between an inner city school any place. In Chicago and, let's say, New Rochelle High School, where I taught, so things were sort of obscured and covered up. But there were many schools that produced wonderful students and students who went on to colleges and careers. That too was an element of emphasizing things in such a way that an element of failure would be created. Mainly, America was not falling apart educationally, and there was, however, a segment of American student that was and that still is almost a natural consequence of things." Well, one thing is certain. The final version of the commission's report was not boring. It did get the attention of the American public, even if Summers' assertion is correct, that they were less than accurate in their use of empirical data. The public release of A Nation at Risk in 1983 demonstrates the overall irony surrounding the work of the National Commission on Excellence in Education. Remember that the work of the commission was intended to be the impetus for abolishing the Department of Education. Secretary of Education Terrell Bell was pleased with the final report, albeit understanding that its alarmist tone might create further problems in the quest to fulfill President Reagan's vow to abolish the department. Well, he gave it to President Reagan for his review, and he was told that the president was pleased with it. Interestingly, A Nation at Risk did not address Reagan's full education agenda, specifically school tax credits, vouchers, or prayer in schools. This concerned Bell, and he wondered how more conservative members of the public, including those serving on the commission, would deal with the release of the report. Remember that Annette Kirk, the wife of conservative public school critic Russell Kirk, was handpicked by President Reagan to serve on the NCEE. While Annette Kirk was intended to represent the view of parents regarding the state of education in the U.S., she, alongside other commissioner members, actually had an agenda of her own. She was a strong advocate for school choice in the form of school tax credits and vouchers that could be used for parents to send their children to private schools at the government's expense. In fact, several commission members had met with members of President Reagan's administration to discuss their concerns that their own educational agenda had not been properly reflected in A Nation at Risk. Specifically, according to Annette Kirk, they had been unable to convince the Commission to adopt a recommendation supporting school tax credits and vouchers. According to Kirk, however, the statement in the report about parents as the primary educators of their children had opened the door for a discussion by President Reagan about school tax credits and vouchers. A ceremony was arranged in the State Department with President Reagan to publicly release A Nation at Risk before the full press corps. President Reagan would begin his speech on April 26, 1983, by lauding the Commission's work and reiterating their findings that the educational system in America was failing. He supported their recommendations. A little over halfway into his speech, however, his focus shifted sharply from the actual content of the Commission's report. He stated, "Your report emphasizes that the federal role in education should be limited to specific areas, and any assistance should be provided with a minimum of administrative burdens on our schools, colleges, and teachers. You call for an end to federal intrusion, and that is consistent with our task of redefining the federal role in education. I believe that parents, not government, have the primary responsibility for the education of their children. Parental authority is not conveyed by the state. Rather, parents delegate to their elected school board representatives and state legislators the responsibility for their children's schooling." He further went on saying, in a 1982 Gallup poll, the majority of those surveyed thought Washington should exert less influence in determining the educational program of the public schools. So we'll continue to work in the months ahead for passage of tuition tax credits, vouchers, educational savings accounts, voluntary school prayer, and abolishing the Department of Education. Our agenda is to restore quality education by increasing competition and by strengthening parental choice and local control. Later, Commission Chair Gardner would describe several Commission members who were seated in the front row as Reagan delivered his comments as dismayed. Reagan had turned the unveiling of A Nation at Risk into a speech that dramatically distorted the findings of the Commission, which had not addressed school vouchers or prayer in schools at all. In the final installment of my series on A Nation at Risk, I'll discuss what would become known as the Sandia Report. This report, created a decade later, would create consternation among the Department of Education's administration. It had the potential to pull back the curtain on the dubious findings of A Nation at Risk and dismantle what had become the mantra of the federal government, that American schools are failing and in need of constant reform.